What's going on, guys? My name's Chris. You're watching Raising the Bar, and today we're going to be talking about how to calculate our macros. This is part one of a self-training series where we're going to cover everything there is to know about training yourself. If you don't have the money to hire a coach or you don't have the means, well, guess what? You can watch these videos and do everything yourself. We're going to be kicking it off by calculating our macros. Now, I want to preface this video by saying this method's not new. There's multiple ways to skin a cat. What we're going to be doing today is reviewing Christian Guzman's video, but doing it in a little bit more of a clear, concise fashion, utilizing a PowerPoint presentation that I put together. So hopefully you guys can follow along, calculate your own macros, and then from there, we're going to move into step two, which is building out meal plans. But first, we got to get those macros lined up. So let's kick it right off. First thing we need to do is figure out what our maintenance calories are. So the way that we're going to do that is by taking a look at the continuum along the top. So we have our maintenance number, our cutting number, and our bulking numbers, but we got to figure out what those are. So the way that we're going to do that is utilize these four variables. We have 14, we have 15, and we have 16. This is all dependent on your activity level. So if you're a sedentary person, you would go 14. If you're moderately active, you'd go 15. If you're highly active, you'd go 16. I always recommend starting at 14 because most of us are not that active and are not going to burn those extra calories. Not only that, but it's a great starting point. So what we're going to do today is utilize a basic individual. That's 200 pounds. As you can see along the right-hand side here, works a desk job, 29 years old. Not that the age really matters very much, but the 200-pound number is really what's important. So what we're going to do is take our body weight and multiply it by that activity factor. In this example, we're going to be utilizing 14. So we take 200, multiply it by the 14, and we get 2,800 calories. Now, in theory, 2,800 calories should keep our weight the same day in and day out. Now, depending on what your goals are, whether you want to cut weight or whether you want to gain weight, what you have to do is either add or subtract 500 calories. So we have our 2,800 maintenance, then we're going to subtract 500, which gives us 2,300. If you wanted to gain weight, you would add 500 to give us 3,300 calories. Now, that 500 calorie number is very important. The reason we utilize 500 as our number is because there's 7 days in a week. 7 times 500 equals 3,500 calories. What that equates to is 1 pound of body mass. There's 3,500 calories in 1 pound. So by either adding 500 or subtracting 500, we get the same 3,500 number, which could either add a pound per week or lose 1 pound per week. In the example today, we're going to be cutting. So we're going to utilize that 2,300 number that we calculated here based on our body weight and our activity level and what our goals are. So now that we have that number, the next thing we need to do is determine our protein intake. So protein is relatively simple. What you need to do is be honest with yourself here, of course. Are you high body fat and low muscle? Are you relatively in shape, or are you very low body fat? And that's going to determine which variable you should use to calculate your protein. I put together this little activity guide along the left-hand side. 0.75 is your number if you have high body fat. 1 is your number if you're in shape, and 1.25 is if you're low body fat. So we're going to take our body weight again and multiply it by the variable that we identify with. In this case, we're going to use 1. We're going to keep it very simple. You can utilize this chart here to determine roughly where you are in terms of your body fat percentage. This varies drastically, but just be honest with yourself. I typically find 1 is typically a good starting point for most people, unless you're on the heavier side. But if we utilize the 1 and you identify on this chart where you fall in particular, feel free to utilize this formula to figure out your protein levels. Again, in this case, we're going to use 1, so that gives us 200 grams of protein. Step 2 is to calculate our fats. Now, fats are a little different because it's preferential. Do you love fats? Do you love carbs? Or do you not really care? Along the top, we have another continuum. We have whether or not you love carbs, we're going to utilize 0.3. If you don't care, 0.35. And if you really love fat, we're going to use 0.4. Just like before, we're going to utilize those variables, multiply it by our body weight to get a number. And then what we have here is our guide. So we can figure out exactly how many grams of fat we're going to be eating. Just like along the top, 0.3 is if you love carbs, 0.35 is if you don't really care, and 0.4 is if you love fat. Now what we're going to do is multiply that number by our body weight, just like we did with the protein, to figure out how many grams of fat we should be eating. So in this particular example, I utilized 0.35 because this particular hypothetical person doesn't really care about fats or carbs. They just want things to be relatively even. So 0.35 times the 200 pounds, because that's what we weigh, equals 70 grams of fat. So now we have 200 grams of protein, 70 grams of fat, and the only thing left here is to figure out our carbohydrates. So let's dive right into that. Carbs are a little different. And the reason I say that is because it's not quite as simple. What we need to do is reverse engineer based on the caloric target we established in the beginning, and then subtract the amount of calories we have so far. So let me explain. We need to first understand that protein has 4 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram, and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Now remember, our goal target is 2,300 calories. So what we need to do is figure out how many calories are coming from protein, how many calories are coming from fat, and then we're going to work from there. So 200 grams of protein is what we established, right? Times 4, because there's 4 calories per gram, gives us 800 calories. Of that 2,300 will be coming from protein. Same thing for fat. 70 times 9 equals 630. Again, 70 grams of fat is what we established we need. Multiply that by 9, because that's how many calories are in each gram, gives us 630 calories. Now what we need to do is add those two numbers together. So protein plus fat calories equals 1430. That's the amount of calories we have from protein and fat. All right? So now what we need to do is subtract 1430 from our goal calories. So we have our goal calories minus the fat and the protein, which comes out to 2,300 minus 1430, which leaves us with 870 calories remaining. That 870 calories is the amount of calories that we're going to have from carbohydrates. So how do we find out how many grams we need? Very easy. Now what we're going to do is take those remaining calories, 870, divide it by 4 calories per gram, because there's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. And then we've got 870 remaining calories divided by 4 equals 217.5 grams. That's how many carbohydrates you'd be eating. This formula, you can utilize the exact same formula, just make sure you're utilizing your own body weight, but the actual formula and math breakdown is the exact same. So now that we've got that, we have our macros. We have 200 grams of protein, 70 grams of fat, and 217 grams of carbohydrates. Now, I did put this fun fact along the side. A lot of people don't realize this, but alcohol itself is actually its own bracket with 7 calories per gram. So when you go out drinking, keep that in mind. Now that we've got our macros figured out, I always like to check my work just to make sure everything lines up. The way that we're going to do that is take our protein, fat, and carbs and multiply it by the amount of calories per gram of each. And then add that all together and see if that number is close or exactly where we need to be for our target calories. So 200 times 4 for our protein equals 800. Fat 70 times 9 equals 630. Carbs 217 times 4 equals 868. When we add that all together, we got 2298. So 2,298 calories. Pretty damn close to what our target was. If we added in that extra half gram for the carbohydrates, we'd be spot on. But I always like to round down. So compared to our target of 2,300, I think we're good to go. So now that we've calculated where our macros are for a 200-pound individual, in our next video, what we're going to cover is how to build out a couple meal plans to hit these targets. I hope you guys like this video. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe if this helps you out. Feel free to let me know, and if you need any help, feel free to reach out. You can find me on my website, RTBTransformations.com. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and stay tuned for part 2. Take care.